My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a history teacher, and for 41 years I believed history was something that happened in textbooks, safely distant and confined to the past. I was wrong. The past is never truly gone. It had been living right next door to me for 4 decades, slowly suffocating my life under the weight of a meticulously constructed lie. The funeral was on a Tuesday. The sky was the color of old, bruised metal, spitting a fine, cold rain, the kind that soaks you to the bone without ever feeling like a proper storm. I stood at the edge of the plot in the gray October light, watching 2 strangers in mud-stained overalls handle the polished mahogany casket. There was no dignity to this final exit. Just the silence, the hollow clunk of the lowering mechanism, and the hiss of the rain on the wet leaves. The young priest looked painfully cold as he read the standard rites, his voice a rote performance of faith. There were no flowers, only the flimsy arrangement from the cheapest package. No music, no eulogy, and most disturbingly, there were no mourners. Not a single friend, colleague, or relative came to say goodbye to the man they were burying. Only me, the priest, and an old man who had lived next door to my parents for 40 years, a man I now knew to be my grandfather. I couldn't cry. Crying felt like a betrayal, a luxury reserved for the truly bereaved, and I was still reeling from the blast of a truth that had detonated only hours earlier. I simply watched until the end, until the workers started shoveling the wet, dark earth onto the casket with a sound that was sickeningly final. The priest offered condolences that felt meaningless, a hollow ritual for a man he hadn't known. And then the lawyer appeared. He was young, barely 30, his suit looking a little too big on his thin frame, carrying a briefcase that seemed too heavy for his shoulders. He approached carefully, his shoes making a squelching sound on the soaked grass. He looked like a reluctant messenger from a classical tragedy, carrying a decree that would change everything. "Mr. Webb, Marcus Webb." "Yes," my voice was flat. "My name is Daniel Patterson. I was Mr. Hartley's attorney." He gestured toward the mound of fresh earth. "He said you would be here. How did you know that?" I asked. He gave a sad, fleeting smile. "He said you were the only one who would come. He said that despite everything, your loyalty would never fail." That was when he handed me the final envelope. Not the preliminary one I had already opened. That was a copy for me. This one was thick, yellowed, and sealed with a formal wax stamp. It was clearly marked, to be opened in the presence of Richard and Catherine Webb. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to know who I was. I was Marcus Webb, a high school history teacher in Hartford, Connecticut, 41 years old, divorced. I taught my students that history is about people, ordinary people caught in impossible circumstances. I never imagined that I was one of those people. I never imagined my own history was a fortress of lies designed by my parents to hide something monstrous. The old man was Walter Hartley. He moved into the small Cape Cod next door to my parents' house in 1984, the year I was born. For my entire life, he was a silent, almost ghostly presence in our neighborhood. His house was immaculate. His life was orderly. And for as long as I could remember, my parents, Richard and Catherine Webb, had actively, relentlessly hated him. They fed that hatred every day for 40 years. They never spoke a word to him. If they saw him in his driveway, they would instantly duck back inside. If we passed him on the street, they would cross to the opposite side. If Walter waved, they looked right through him. Then there was the fence, the symbol of their hatred and the physical manifestation of their guilt. My father spent an entire summer building it, a 10-foot cedar wall, the maximum height permitted by the city code. He drove every post into the damp Connecticut earth with a visible, focused fury. When he finished, he stood back, breathing hard, gazing at his completed fortress with a profound, weary satisfaction. "There," he said, his voice raw, "now we never have to see him." They sued him 3 times. The first was over a harmless tree branch. My father spent $8,000 and lost. "It's the principal," he insisted. The second suit was over his gentle golden retriever, Biscuit, whom my mother falsely claimed had threatened her. I watched from my bedroom window as Walter, heartbroken, carried the old dog to the animal control van. The third lawsuit was some absurd claim about drainage. Walter never fought back with anger. He cut the branch. He surrendered the dog. He paid the fines. He quietly endured, living out his days 15 feet away. "Why do you hate him so much?" I asked my mother once when I was perhaps 10. Her face became cold, utterly devoid of warmth. He is a dangerous man, Marcus. You are never to speak to him, never to go near him, never to even look at him. Do you understand? But why is he dangerous? What did he do? Some things are not for children to understand, she said, her voice a low warning. Just trust your parents. If I ever catch you talking to that man, there will be serious consequences. But I didn't stay away. The wall my father built was 10 feet tall, a perfect, seamless barrier of resentment. But nature, like truth, always finds a way. Sometime in my 11th year, a small, dark knot fell out of a cedar plank, leaving behind a perfectly circular 6-inch diameter hole right at my eye level. It was small enough to be hidden by a branch or a shadow, but large enough for a child and an old man to see through. I found the hole during one of my habitual explorations of the backyard perimeter, testing the limits of my father's fortress. I pressed my eye to the opening, and for the first time I saw Walter's side of the world. It was a garden, small, impeccably tended, bursting with color and life, the opposite of the sterile perfection of our own lawn. Walter was there, pruning a rose bush. He was exactly as my mother had described him, quiet, old, and completely absorbed in his own world. But he didn't look dangerous. He looked gentle. When he straightened up, he noticed the sudden shadow shift near the fence line. He looked directly at the hole. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew I was about to be caught and that the consequences would be severe. Walter didn't call my parents. He didn't rush over or look angry. Instead, he simply walked slowly toward the fence, stopping directly on his side of the knot hole. "Hello," he said, his voice soft, almost a sigh. It was the first word I had ever heard him speak directly to me. I panicked, ready to flee. "I'm sorry," I mumbled into the wood. "I shouldn't be here." "Nonsense," he replied. "It's a beautiful day. You're simply appreciating the craftsmanship of your father's fence." He paused. "My name is Walter Hartley. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Marcus." My name, he knew my name. "How do you know my name?" "I know a lot about you, Marcus," he said, and his voice held a profound, quiet melancholy that struck me even at that age. "I've watched you grow up. You're a fine boy, a little too curious for your own good, perhaps, but that's the mark of a good mind." That was the beginning. Our relationship, the single most important, enduring bond of my childhood, was conducted entirely through that 6-inch circular frame. It was a clandestine, forbidden world, a secret that defined the contours of my life against the cold, sterile reality of my parents' escalating unhappiness. My home life was a quiet, relentless pressure cooker. My parents were consumed by their own Cold War, fought over money and mounting resentment. My father, Richard, an outwardly successful regional manager, became increasingly obsessive and paranoid, constantly worried about financial security and maintaining appearances. My mother, Catherine, responded with a brittle, defensive shell of resentment. The emotional temperature in the house was permanently set to freezing, but Walter's world, viewed through the lens of the knot hole, was warm, real, and safe. Every day after school, if the coast was clear, I would race to the fence. He was always there, waiting, always standing 15 feet away from my father's arbitrary property line, but always right at the hole. He never talked about my parents directly, never asked why they hated him, and never broke his silence regarding the feud. He simply accepted the reality of the fence. "Why do you teach history, Marcus?" he asked me once. "I like finding out why things are the way they are," I said, "and I like knowing the truth." He smiled, a sad, deep smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "That is the noblest pursuit a man can have, Marcus. But be warned, the truth is often much harder to carry than a lie." He didn't teach me about history, though he had been a professor himself. He taught me about morality. He taught me about choice. He taught me about the difference between consequence and punishment. He carved small wooden birds and animals and slid them carefully under the fence, gifts of patience and artistry. He was, to me, the embodiment of a world that existed beyond the angry, stifling boundaries of my childhood. He was a beacon of quiet decency in a house consumed by rage and secrets. He saw the things my parents missed. He celebrated my small victories and soothed my adolescent failures. He became my confidant, my silent cheerleader, and the only adult I truly trusted. Our conversations were low, cautious whispers, conducted with the constant, thrilling paranoia of being caught. It was a love built not on shared holidays or family dinners, but on stolen fragments of time and shared silence. He was, without a doubt, the most present and attentive man in my life, and he was forbidden to be within 15 feet of me. I had to know why. I grew up, went to college, and moved away, but the knothole remained our lifeline. When I married, Walter was the only person I told, whispering the news to the cedar plank late one summer evening. When my divorce finalized a few years later, he was the first and only person who called. I had given him my number years ago, through a note shoved under the fence. His call was a small, quiet offering of sympathy, a violation of the silence that had protected him for so long. 2 months ago, I was driving home from the high school where I taught history when I saw the ambulance lights flashing next door. Walter's immaculate house was surrounded by emergency vehicles. I pulled over, my heart seizing with cold panic, and watched as they brought him out on a stretcher, an oxygen mask covering his face. My parents' garage door was closed. They were home, but they were silent, hidden behind the walls of their guilt. I waited 2 agonizing days. I called the hospital repeatedly, giving my name as Marcus Hartley, using the surname I knew he carried, but they refused to give me any information, citing privacy laws. Finally, I drove to the hospital, stood in the lobby, and told the receptionist that Walter Hartley was the only father I had ever known. She finally relented, giving me the phone number for his attorney, Mr. Patterson. "He prepared for this, Marcus," Patterson told me over the phone. "He instructed me to contact you immediately upon his incapacitation. He knew his time was short. He made sure you were the executor of his estate, and he left 2 things for you in his house, Marcus. The key is with me. Everything else is with the local funeral home." When I entered Walter's house later that day with the key, the air was still and quiet, filled with the faint scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. It was the first time I had ever been inside, and yet it felt more like home than the house next door. The first item he left me was a legal file containing his last will and testament. It was simple. The house, the small trust fund, and all his personal effects were left to me, Marcus Webb. The other item was a heavy cardboard box tucked beneath his bed, clearly marked in his familiar, precise handwriting. The truth. I set the box on the floor and stared at it. The truth. After 4 decades of silence, of endured hatred of that towering cedar wall, this was Walter's final bequest. I picked up the will again. There was a handwritten codicil at the bottom, signed just 3 weeks prior. "Marcus, if you are reading this, I have failed. I always hoped Richard would confess and lift the burden himself. He hasn't. I have left you 2 envelopes. The first is in your name, Marcus Webb. It is to be opened first privately. It will explain everything. The second is marked for Richard and Catherine Webb. It contains the consequence. You must deliver it after you understand your history. You are the only one left who can choose the truth. Do not open the second envelope until you have read the first. The world is built on lies. You, my son, must build your life on honesty. Good luck." He called me his son. That single phrase cut deeper than any accusation. I found the first envelope, my envelope taped inside the cardboard box. I tore it open. Inside, Walter's handwriting was steady and meticulous, documenting the 40-year history that bound us. "My name is Walter Hartley. My son is Richard Hartley, now known to you as Richard Webb." The air rushed out of my lungs. Richard Webb, my father, Richard Hartley. The simple name change was the first tremor. Walter explained the core truth. Richard Webb was a fugitive. In the autumn of 1979, Richard, then a 27-year-old law school dropout with a crippling drinking problem, was driving his blue Mustang sports car in New Haven, Connecticut. He was drunk. He hit a woman named Sarah Martinez and fled the scene. Sarah, a mother of 2 young children, Michael and Alina, died instantly. Walter, who worked in state government at the time, found the evidence immediately. The smashed headlight of Richard's Mustang, a frenzied repair job at a local garage, and Richard's own drunken, handwritten confession, penned in the cold hours after the accident. The police were close, relying on witness descriptions of a blue sports car. Richard, terrified and ruthless, panicked. He fled the country the next day, using his father's connections and resources to vanish. He left Walter with the evidence, the police reports, and the truth. Walter was a man of profound integrity. He tried repeatedly to convince his son to return and confess. Richard refused, threatening to never return, never speak to him again, and if he ever had children, Walter would never meet them. Walter faced an impossible moral decision: turn in his only son and condemn him to prison or live a lie. He chose a third, agonizing path: silent atonement. He liquidated his assets, moved next door, changed his own life to become the constant, vigilant observer, the self-imposed warden who protected his grandson while waiting for the right moment to ensure the truth was finally delivered. The hatred from Richard and Catherine was the price of Walter's presence in my life. The fence was Richard's final act of control, a desperate attempt to keep the only man who knew his true history from infecting his new, immaculate life. I spent an hour reading the contents of the box, the yellowed newspaper clipping of Sarah Martinez's death, the police report detailing the blue sports car, the receipts for the Mustang repairs, and Richard's own frantic, panicked letter. The evidence was irrefutable. The man who taught me history had been a living footnote in a 40-year-old murder case, and the man who raised me was a murderer and a lifelong fugitive. I was the son of a killer. I drove straight to the funeral home and claimed Walter's ashes, leaving the second envelope, the final one, marked for Richard and Catherine, in the safe hands of Mr. Patterson. The years passed like water flowing under a bridge, marked by the milestones of my life and the constancy of that small hole in the fence. Walter watched me grow up. He celebrated my first A on a high school history test. "I knew you had a gift for understanding the past," he told me, beaming through the cedar. He consoled me when I didn't make the junior varsity basketball team. "Not everyone is meant to be an athlete, Marcus, but you have gifts that will last longer than any game." He listened with infinite patience to all the small, seismic dramas of adolescence, the girls who didn't call back, the friends who betrayed me, the universal awkwardness of becoming a man. "Growing up is hard," he said, shaking his head. "Harder than people remember. But you are handling it well, better than I did at your age." He was, without a doubt, the most present and attentive man in my life, and he was forbidden to be within 15 feet of me. When I turned 16 and finally earned my driver's license, the flimsy piece of plastic felt like a declaration of independence. Suddenly, I had mobility. I had the power of unauthorized absence. My parents, consumed by their escalating financial anxieties and their own Cold War, rarely noticed if I was gone for an hour or two. And the first place I drove, the very first time I slipped away alone, was not to a friend's house or a mall. It was around the block, to the front of Walter Hartley's house. I parked my beat-up Ford Tempo a few houses down, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced my father had installed some kind of proximity alarm on the property line. I walked up the pavement of Walter's driveway, my feet crossing the threshold of the property my parents had tried to quarantine for over a decade. I climbed the 3 wooden steps to his porch and raised my hand to knock. It was the first time I had ever prepared to face him without a wall between us. I had known this man for 9 years, had spoken to him hundreds of times, but I had never seen him outside the context of that 6-inch circle of wood. He opened the door slowly. He was wearing the same kind of cardigan, the same gentle, aging face, but seeing him fully standing in the doorway of his home was jarring. His eyes widened when he saw me. He didn't look happy, he looked terrified. "Marcus," he whispered, glancing past me toward my parents' house, visible in the distance down the cul-de-sac. "What are you doing here? You know this is a bad idea." "I wanted to talk to you," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Face to face, for real, I'm 16. I can make my own decisions now." He studied me for a long moment, the anxiety etched deep into the lines around his eyes. I could almost see the moral calculation taking place, the risk to my safety versus the overwhelming need for connection. Finally, a decision was made. The terror didn't vanish, but a profound weariness seemed to override it. "Come in," he said, pulling me inside quickly and shutting the door with a soft click. His house was small, a modest Cape Cod, but it was warmer and richer than my parents' sterile, modern home could ever be. It was a haven built of history. Books were everywhere. They lined the walls in overflowing shelves. They were stacked precariously on end tables, piled on the floor. Novels, ancient histories, biographies, worn travel guides, more books than any library I had ever been in. The air smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and Earl Grey tea. Photos hung on the walls, not of family, but of landscapes. The pyramids, the Eiffel Tower, the winding, narrow streets of an ancient European city. And in one frame, a younger man, perhaps 30, stood on a mountain peak, arms spread wide to the sky, grinning at the camera, a lifetime of vibrant adventure in his eyes. "Is that you?" I asked, pointing to the mountain photo. He barely looked at it. A very long time ago, before everything changed. What changed? He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to a large, worn armchair by the fireplace. Sit, let me make us some tea. The living room was deeply cozy. A hand-knitted blanket was draped over the couch, and a large, black cat I'd never seen before was asleep on a sunny windowsill. I didn't know you had a cat, I said. Her name is Shadow. She showed up a few years ago and just never left. Sometimes, he said, returning with 2 steaming mugs, the best family is the family that chooses you. He sat in the armchair opposite me. We just looked at each other for a minute, no longer bound by the frame of a knot hole. It felt unsettlingly real. It's strange, he murmured, holding his mug. Seeing you here in my home, I've imagined this moment so many times. Me too. I took a sip of the tea. It was Earl Grey with honey, exactly the kind of comforting, classic flavor I would have expected. Mr. Hartley, I began, setting the mug down. Can I ask you something I've wanted to know my whole life? Anything. Why do my parents hate you so much? What did you do to them? The question hung between us, heavy and unavoidable. I watched his face closely, waiting for some flicker of guilt, some hint of the dangerous man my mother had warned me about. He set his teacup down slowly, carefully. That is a complicated question, Marcus, he said, his voice now lower, heavier, with a complicated answer. And I'm not sure this is the right time. Please, I pleaded. I need to know. I feel like I'm living in a fog. They built their whole lives around hating you. I deserve to know why. He was quiet for a very long time, rubbing the rim of his teacup with his thumb. When he spoke, it was with the sound of decades of regret. Some secrets are not mine to tell. Some truths would only cause pain to people who don't deserve it. But I will tell you this. I have never done anything to intentionally harm your parents. Everything I have done, every risk I have taken, I have done because I love you. The word hit me like a physical blow. Love. It was a word that was used sparingly and conditionally in my parents' house. Love me? I stammered. You barely know me. We talk through a hole in a fence. I know you better than you think, he said, looking at me with those sad, deep-set eyes. I have watched you grow up. I have seen you struggle and succeed. I have seen the kind of person you are becoming, Marcus, and I am proud of you, prouder than you will ever know. Why? I asked, confused. Why would you be proud of me? I'm just the kid next door. He opened his mouth, and I could see him fighting an internal battle, wrestling with a secret that was physically straining him. His jaw worked, his eyes moistened, and then he pulled back from the brink. Someday, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Someday I will tell you everything, but not today. Today, let's just enjoy this. You here in my home after all these years. We talked for 3 hours that day. It was different from the fence conversations, more relaxed, more open. I told him about the suffocating coldness in my own house, about the arguments and the resentments. He listened without judgment, and when I was done, he offered a profound observation that stayed with me forever. Family is complicated, Marcus. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But that doesn't mean you are unlovable. It means they are broken in ways you cannot fix. Are you broken, Mr. Hartley? His eyes went distant, focused on a spot somewhere far beyond the walls of the house. In some ways, yes, we all are, but some breaks heal and some do not. What broke you? He gave that weary, sad smile again. The same thing that breaks everyone eventually. Lost opportunities, profound regret, and the immense weight of choices made long, long ago. I visited him regularly after that, twice a week, sometimes more, always careful to calculate my parents' absences. They never noticed. They were too preoccupied with their own decaying reality. Walter became my anchor, my confidant, the only adult I truly trusted. When I left for college at 18, Walter was the only one who cried. I'm so proud of you, he said, wrapping me in a hug on his front porch. It was the first time he had ever touched me. He felt frail, smaller than I expected, his bones thin beneath the worn wool of his cardigan. I'll come back and visit, I promised, my own throat tightening. I know you will, he said, pulling back, and you will be here. He smiled, a heartbreakingly genuine expression of loyalty. I will always be here, Marcus, right next door, waiting. The funeral of Walter Hartley, a man who loved me more than his own life, was performed privately on Tuesday. I stood there, shivering, holding the heavy, sealed second envelope that contained the final consequence of my father's choices. I drove the envelope straight back to my own home, the house where I had been raised on 40 years of meticulously curated lies. My father, Richard Webb, was home. He was in the kitchen, engrossed in his tablet, sipping his red wine. My mother, Catherine, was at the stove, stirring a pot of something that smelled faintly of rosemary and roast chicken. A tableau of perfect, fraudulent domesticity. They looked like the perfect, successful, middle-aged Connecticut couple, utterly oblivious to the moral earthquake that had just occurred next door. I didn't bother with a greeting. I walked straight into the kitchen, the cardboard box of The Truth held against my chest. I placed it squarely on the kitchen table, pushing aside a bread basket and 2 placemats. The sound was a loud, final thud. My mother turned first, her smile instantly vanishing. "Marcus, we didn't hear you. Are you all right? You look terrible." My father looked up, and his eyes, still slightly obscured by the reading glasses, flicked from my face to the handwritten marker on the box. And in that instant, everything shifted. The color drained from his face as though a stopper had been pulled. The comfortable composure of Richard Webb shattered, replaced by the naked, terrified animal of Richard Hartley. "What is this?" My mother asked, her voice sharp with alarm, moving toward the table. "It's a gift," I said, my voice unnaturally calm, a contrast to the earthquake happening inside me. "From Walter, your father's father." My mother froze. My father's hand, reaching instinctively for the box, jerked back. He stared at the writing, at the box that contained the last 40 years of their life sentence. "I told you not to go to that funeral," he hissed, standing up, his chair scraping violently backward across the floor. "I told you to stay away from that dangerous old man." "His name was Walter Hartley," I repeated, my voice steady. "And he wasn't dangerous. He was your father, and he was the only honest man either of us ever knew. Now open it, Dad, or I will." He couldn't meet my gaze. He looked small, shrunken, stripped bare. I reached into the box and pulled out the 1979 confession letter, slamming it onto the table. "Read it, Mom," I commanded, pointing to the familiar handwriting. "It's all here, the drunken drive, the horrible sound, the panic, the name of the woman, Sarah Martinez. And the price of the cover-up, 4 decades of hate, that 10-foot fence, and the death of your own father." My mother let out a sharp, choked gasp, backing away from the table as if the letter were actively contagious. She looked at my father, her eyes wide, pleading for a denial, a lie she could hold on to. But my father just collapsed back into his seat, his head sinking into his hands. "It was an accident," he mumbled, his voice muffled by defeat. "It was 45 years ago." "The statute of limitations." "I don't care about the law," I interrupted, leaning over the table, my voice low and fierce. "I care about Michael and Alina. I care about justice. And I care about the fact that you allowed your father to live and die in solitary confinement, just to save your own miserable skin." I grabbed the thick, wax-sealed envelope that the lawyer had given me, the one marked to be opened in the presence of Richard and Catherine Webb. I tore the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is the last part of Walter's will," I told them. "He left me everything, including the house. But he also left a provision, a final moral contract. Listen carefully." I began to read, "In consideration of the love I hold for my grandson, Marcus Webb, and the final opportunity for redemption that even my son, Richard Hartley, a.k.a. Richard Webb, deserves, I provide the following condition to the full execution of my estate, which includes the house next door, all financial assets, and the evidence of the crime committed on October 12, 1979. I paused, holding the sheet of paper so tightly my knuckles were white, allowing the silence to settle around the words I had just read. My father, Richard, had lifted his head, his face a mask of shock and desperate curiosity. He was clinging to the hope that a legal loophole, a final twist of the knife, might yet save him. My mother, Catherine, remained frozen by the stove, her hands clasped tightly over her mouth, her eyes fixed on the man she had been married to for decades, a man whose foundation of lies had just crumbled beneath her feet. I continued reading from Walter's final declaration, the words ringing with the clear, unwavering authority of a man settling his accounts before death. "The entire estate, including all evidence, passes unconditionally to my grandson, Marcus Webb, however the accompanying sealed letter, which contains the location and details necessary to contact Sarah Martinez's surviving children, Michael and Alina Martinez, will only be delivered to Marcus under one condition: that my son Richard Hartley appears with Marcus at the law offices of Patterson and Associates within 48 hours of my burial. This meeting is not to confess, but merely to witness the transfer of the final documents. If Richard fails to appear, the lawyer is instructed to immediately take the evidence within the truth box to the appropriate authorities, reopening the case under the premise of new, credible evidence, and providing a full statement regarding Richard's new identity and 40-year evasion. By making this demand, I force my son to choose between confronting the moral weight of his actions in the presence of his own family or facing the immediate, certain consequences of the law. I lowered the letter. The air in the kitchen felt combustible. Walter had given my father a choice, a perverse, painful, final chance at redemption that forced Richard to acknowledge the truth. He had to face me, his son and his father's chosen inheritor and the legal representative of the truth, or he would face the police. It was a moral checkmate. 48 hours, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That means by Thursday afternoon. You have to come with me to the lawyer's office, Dad. You have to sit there while I take possession of the names of the children you orphaned. You have to look the truth in the eye one last time. My father pushed himself back from the table, his chair hitting the wall behind him. No, he choked out, shaking his head rapidly. I won't do it. This is blackmail. This is illegal. You can't force me. It's not blackmail, Richard, I said, using his first name, the distance in my voice chilling him more than any shouting. It's consequence. Walter couldn't turn you in when you were young. He chose family. But he made sure that if you ran to the grave, you would run with the threat of the truth following you. You have 2 days, Dad. 2 days to choose between a symbolic act of contrition to your own son or a full-scale police investigation that will expose everything. He looked at me and I saw a flash of the same calculating coldness that had driven him to change his name 40 years prior. If I go with you, what then? You think you can forgive me? You think you can live with the son of a killer? I don't know, I admitted honestly, the pain of the admission a sharp physical thing. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I know I can't live with the lie anymore. And after that meeting, I'm taking this evidence and I'm going to find Michael and Alina Martinez. I am going to give them the name of the man who killed their mother. They deserve justice, regardless of what the statute of limitations says 45 years later. My mother finally moved, slowly walking around the table until she stood next to my father. She placed a trembling hand on his arm, and this time he didn't flinch away. He was too broken. Richard, she said, her voice hollow, utterly stripped of its usual middle-class poise. Did you kill that woman? My father didn't answer her. He didn't have to. The truth was heavy in the air, fouling the scent of the dinner cooking on the stove. He looked from the open box of evidence to the crumpled letter in my hand. And finally, his gaze settled on the fence outside the kitchen window, the 10-foot wall that had been his cage and his shield. He looked at it and the fight seemed to drain out of him entirely. He was a defeated man. I'll go, he mumbled, his eyes still fixed on the window. I'll go to the lawyer, but I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to see anyone. And I want that house. It belongs to me. It's my inheritance. The house is mine, I said firmly, gathering the papers and putting them back into the box. And the only thing you inherit is the moral reckoning you've avoided for 40 years. I left the kitchen, leaving my parents in the ruins of their carefully curated life. I drove straight back to Walter's house, which now felt like a refuge, a fortress built on painful, honest truth. I sat up all night in the armchair, the box resting beside me, staring at the pictures of Sarah Martinez and her 2 young children. I wasn't just planning the next steps. I was processing a lifetime of deception, trying to reconcile the cold, calculating fugitive with the man who had taught me to tie a necktie. The next day, Wednesday, was a blur. I called the lawyer, Daniel Patterson, and set the meeting for the following afternoon. I then drove to the high school, called in sick, and spent the entire day in Walter's study, poring over his books and notes. He hadn't just collected travel guides. He had an astonishing collection of legal history texts, focusing specifically on statutes of limitations for vehicular homicide and evasion. He had spent decades not just living the secret, but studying the legal landscape of his son's crime, preparing for the day the truth might surface. He had known every possible outcome. As I studied his meticulous notes, I found a small, leather-bound journal hidden inside a copy of A Tale of Two Cities. It wasn't about the crime, it was about me. September 1993. Walter's handwriting was steady then. Marcus turned 9 today. I watched him through the fence, playing with that ridiculous tennis ball. He's starting to ask real questions about history, about justice. He told me he wants to be a detective someday, to uncover secrets and make things right. My heart breaks every time he says it. He's trying to be the man his father refused to be, and he has no idea the greatest secret he's hunting lives right next door. July 2005. He got his driver's license today. I saw him drive past. He is so eager for freedom. I know he will come here. He is 16, and he will defy them because he seeks truth more than comfort. He is my blood in the best sense of the word. I pray I live long enough to give him this final truth, but I must ensure the evidence survives me. He needs to know he was loved. He needs to know that his father's crime does not define his own character. The journal confirmed every sacrifice, every hidden moment of love. Walter had lived for me, for the day I would be old enough to bear the terrible weight of this inheritance. Thursday afternoon arrived, overcast and cold, mirroring the mood in the car. My father was driving his sedan, his usual vehicle of proud anonymity. I was in the passenger seat, the box secured behind me. My father hadn't spoken since we left the driveway. He looked haggard, unshaven, his eyes red-rimmed, a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. He had gone from the picture of middle-class success to a haunted shell in 48 hours. The law offices of Patterson and Associates were in a stately but slightly dilapidated building in downtown Hartford. We sat in the waiting room, my father, the killer and fugitive, and me, the son and inheritor of the truth, in strained silence. Daniel Patterson, the young lawyer, called us into a small conference room. He was professional, solemn, and clearly nervous about the drama unfolding before him. He placed a large, ornate legal binder on the table. "Mr. Webb," he began, addressing me, "under the terms of Mr. Hartley's will, I can confirm that your father, Richard Webb, has complied with the 48-hour clause. Therefore, the estate, including the house and all its contents, including the evidence within that box, is now legally and unconditionally yours." He slid a deed and other legal documents across the table toward me. "Now," Patterson continued, carefully avoiding my father's eyes, "I am also instructed to provide you with this final, sealed document." He reached into his briefcase and produced a simple, heavy white envelope, sealed with the same familiar wax stamp as before. My father finally spoke, his voice low and tight. "Wait, what is that?" "It is the final condition, Mr. Webb," Patterson explained. "The one you are not privy to. This contains the current, confidential location and contact information for Michael and Alina Martinez, the surviving children of Sarah Martinez. Mr. Hartley compiled this information over decades, ensuring it was up to date for this moment." Patterson slid the envelope to me. It felt cold in my hand. The power, the choice, it was all mine now. "Richard," I said, looking at my father across the table, his face a mask of desperate pleading, "I know their names are in this envelope. I know where they live. I have your confession in the box." He didn't need to ask the question. He knew what I was asking. "Will you turn me in?" "Before I do anything," I said, "I need to know one thing. Why, Dad, you had a year between the accident and Walter's threat. Why didn't you turn yourself in then? Why did you choose to build a lie instead of seeking redemption?" My father looked at the table, his eyes filled with a corrosive mixture of self-pity and shame. "I couldn't," he whispered. "I couldn't face the loss of my entire future. I knew if I went to jail, I would lose everything. The career, the chance at a wife, a home. A son. I chose you, Marcus. I chose you over the past." "You didn't choose me," I countered, my voice thick with the emotional weight of the realization. "You chose yourself. You chose to live as a fraud for 40 years, and you chose to make your own father pay the price for your cowardice." I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. My anger wasn't just moral. It was the intense, personal fury of a son finally seeing his father's love as nothing more than a carefully maintained prop. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The tension in the room was excruciating. I picked up the box and the envelope. "The meeting is over, Mr. Patterson," I said. "Thank you for executing my grandfather's will." I turned to my father. "I'm leaving now, Dad. I'm going to New Haven to find the Martinez family. I'm going to give them the answers they've been waiting 45 years for." "Marcus, don't," he pleaded, finally rising from his seat, reaching for me. "You can't do this. You'll destroy me. You'll destroy Mom." I looked him straight in the eye, seeing not my father, but a frightened, guilty stranger. "Walter taught me that my character isn't defined by my father's choices. It's defined by mine, and I choose to finish his history lesson. I left the conference room, leaving my father standing there, his face white, his life finally catching up to him. I walked out into the cold afternoon, the box of evidence heavy under my arm, the sealed envelope promising the address of justice in my hand. I was driving straight to New Haven. The investigation was over. The delivery was about to begin. I drove south toward the coast, toward New Haven. The envelope sat in the passenger seat, holding the coordinates to the two people my father had irrevocably harmed and the two people my grandfather had sacrificed his life to protect from silence. I finally broke the seal on the envelope as I hit the highway. Inside was a neatly typed sheet of paper. Walter had indeed maintained meticulous records, current addresses, phone numbers, and a brief professional summary for both Michael and Elena Martinez. Michael, now 48, was a successful contractor in the area. Elena, 45, worked as a graphic designer, 45 years. A lifetime built on a stolen foundation. The address Walter provided for Michael Martinez led me to a quiet, tree-lined residential street in a solid, working-class neighborhood of New Haven. It was late afternoon, the winter sun already setting, casting long, bruised shadows. I found the house easily, a modest, well-maintained two-story colonial. I parked down the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they were starting to cramp. I sat there for 15 minutes, running through every possible scenario. What do you say to a man whose mother you never knew, a man whose life was ripped apart by the selfishness of your own father? Hello, I'm Marcus. My dad killed your mom and ran. Here's the proof. It sounded crude, impossible, cruel. But I wasn't there to offer comfort. I was there to offer truth, the closure Walter had fought for. I reached behind me and pulled the heavy cardboard box onto my lap. This was my shield and my offering. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the front door of Michael Martinez's house. The porch light was on. I rang the bell. I could hear the faint sound of a television inside. The door opened, and a man stood there wiping his hands on a dish towel. He was a big man, built like a retired football player, with kind eyes and dark, receding hair. He looked tired, the deep fatigue of a man who worked hard and carried a lot of responsibility. Michael Martinez, 48 years old, 7 when his mother was killed. "Can I help you?" he asked, his expression polite but wary. "Mr. Martinez?" "Yes, I'm Mike." I took a breath that felt cold and painful in my lungs. "My name is Marcus Webb. I'm here about your mother, Sarah Martinez." The name, Sarah Martinez, hit him like a silent physical blow. The polite caution instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of shock and deep, immediate suspicion. His jaw tightened. "How do you know that name?" he demanded, his voice dropping, becoming gravelly and defensive. "That was 45 years ago. Are you a reporter?" "No, I'm not a reporter. I'm a history teacher from Hartford." I took a step back, holding the box out in front of me with both hands. "I have something for you, something that belonged to my grandfather. It's about your mother's accident." He looked down at the box, at the words "THE Truth" scrawled on the side, and then back at my face. The sheer absurdity of the situation seemed to register. "What are you talking about? My mother was killed in a hit-and-run in '79. The police closed the case." Nobody was ever found. "The driver was found, Mr. Martinez. He was just never arrested. He was identified immediately, but he fled and changed his name. He was protected by a lie." This box contains the proof of who he was, what he did, and why he got away with it. Michael just stared, his eyes wide, struggling to process the information. 45 years of settled pain suddenly churned up again. "Who are you, really?" he asked, suspicion overriding the shock. "Why are you doing this?" "Because the driver was my father," I said, the words a raw, painful confession. "Richard Webb. His real name is Richard Hartley. He killed your mother, and my grandfather, Walter Hartley, spent the rest of his life gathering this evidence, waiting for the right moment to make sure the truth finally came out. He died this week, and he left the truth to me." Michael didn't move for a long moment. He didn't scream, he didn't slam the door, he didn't punch me. He just stood there, his face a horrifying blank slate, absorbing the magnitude of the revelation. Then slowly he stepped back. "Come inside," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Don't say another word until we are inside." I followed him into his living room. It was warm, comfortable, smelling of wood smoke and dinner. His wife and 2 teenage children were gathered around the television. They looked up, confused by the strange man carrying a dusty box. "Kids, honey," Michael said, his voice strangely calm. "Can you go to your rooms for a little while? I have a very important business matter to discuss with this gentleman." The family sensed the gravity immediately. The wife gave me a searching, worried look, but she quietly ushered the children out of the room. When the door closed, Michael turned to me, the facade of calm finally cracking. His eyes were moist, burning. "Start talking, Mr. Webb. Start talking now, or I swear to God, I will call the police and have you arrested for harassment." I set the box down on his coffee table. I opened it and spread the documents out on the surface. The yellowed newspaper clipping of his mother's death, the police report detailing the blue sports car, the photos of my father's damaged Mustang, the repair receipts, and finally, my father's frantic, handwritten confession from 1979. Michael's large hands were trembling as he reached for the first clipping. He read the headline about the hit and run, his eyes tracing the name Sarah Martinez. Then, he picked up the police report, comparing the witness description to the photos of the Mustang. Finally, he came to my father's letter. He read it slowly, his lips moving silently, absorbing the words. "I was drunk. I didn't see her. I just panicked." He read the letter from Walter, my grandfather, dated a year later, demanding Richard turn himself in, citing the suffering of the children, Michael and Alina. Michael read his own name in the document, a ghost from a past he could never fully access. When he finished, he didn't say anything. He just sat back on the couch, closing his eyes, tears squeezing out from beneath his lids, silent and relentless. It wasn't the cathartic burst of anger I expected. It was the quiet, profound sound of 45 years of unanswered grief finally finding its target. "He told you his name was Webb," Michael whispered, his voice catching. "But it was Hartley, Richard Hartley, and the man next door. The old man who lived next door to you. He was his father, he was your grandfather." "Yes," I confirmed, my throat tight. "Walter Hartley, he was my grandfather. He couldn't turn in his son, but he couldn't live with the lie. He sold his life to move next door and protect me, while gathering the proof of his son's crime. He lived in silence so you could finally have justice." Michael opened his eyes. They were blazing now, not with simple anger, but with a complex, crushing realization of the moral scale of the tragedy. "So he built a fence to keep his father, the one decent man in the story, out. And he built a lie to keep his son, you safe. And he thought he got away with it. He is still technically free," I said, nodding toward the evidence. "The statute of limitations may protect him from the vehicular homicide prosecution, but it doesn't protect him from the truth or from civil liability. He's exposed to fraud and obstruction. More importantly, he's exposed to public accountability. This is what Walter left you. This is the truth of what happened to your mother, and I have the address of your sister, Alina, if you want to share this with her." Michael didn't look at the contact information immediately. He just kept staring at the documents, touching the grainy photograph of his young mother. "I was 7, he said, his voice hollow. "I remember the cops coming. I remember my dad crying on the phone. My sister, Alina, was only 4. We were told it was a monster, a careless phantom in the night. 45 years. We had nothing, no name, no face. And the entire time, the man who did it was living a normal life, having a son, building a fence." He finally looked up at me, his eyes searching my face for something. "Why are you here, Marcus? Why bring this now? You don't have to. You could burn the box. You could protect your father." "Walter taught me that a life built on a lie is no life at all," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I am here because I am the grandson of Walter Hartley, not just the son of Richard Webb." The realization hit me then. I was not just delivering justice for strangers. I was delivering justice for the man I loved, my grandfather. I pushed the box of evidence fully toward him. "This is yours, Michael. The choice of what to do with it is yours. I will give you my number. If you need me to speak, to testify to Walter's intent to confirm my father's identity, I will. But this is your mother's story. It ends when you say it ends." I stood up, giving him space, giving him the privacy he needed for this monumental, terrible moment. Michael Martinez, the 7-year-old boy who had lost his mother, sat on his couch, surrounded by the physical proof of his father's crime and his grandfather's love. I knew that my journey was far from over. Richard Webb still had to face the court of public opinion and the ghost of his past, but my part, the delivery of the truth, was complete. I was a messenger, finally delivering the consequence that had been 45 years in transit. The story did not end that evening in the diner. The truth, once unleashed, does not settle neatly into the pages of history. It creates tremors that travel through the landscape of the present. While the moral sentence was delivered, the emotional consequence for the survivors, Michael, Elena, and myself, was a journey that had just begun. A few months after the house next door sold to a young family, I received a handwritten letter. It was sent to my house, Walter's house, and the return address was a simple P.O. box in New Haven. The script was elegant, feminine, and contained the same quiet intensity I recognized in Michael's resolve. It was from Elena Martinez. Dear Marcus Webb, I know you understand the power of documents. The confession, the receipts, the police report, they gave us the justice of knowing. They gave us the ability to finally mourn a named person who was guilty, rather than an abstract phantom. For that, my brother and I will be eternally grateful to your grandfather, Walter, and to you for your courage in delivering the truth. But there is a piece missing, a piece that only you can provide. I have spent the last few months going through the case files, and I found a single notation in the police report from 1979 that the officer dismissed as irrelevant noise. It mentioned an argument between a man and a woman near the site of the accident, just moments before my mother was struck. This man and woman were seen getting into a blue car, the color matching your father's Mustang, and driving away. The officer assumed they were just bystanders who fled the scene, but the timeline is tight. If your father was arguing with a woman just before he hit my mother, who was she? Was she in the car with him? Was she his girlfriend, his wife? Was she a participant, or simply a witness he silenced? This is the last piece of the historical puzzle, Marcus. My mother's life deserves the full truth. I am not asking you to betray your mother, but I am asking you to be the custodian of history you are. Who was the woman in the car? She is the final witness to the crime. Please, if you know anything, contact me. Sincerely, Elena Martinez. I sat at Walter's desk, holding Elena's letter, my heart pounding a hollow rhythm against my ribs. The woman in the car. It was a detail I had overlooked in the flurry of the initial discovery, focusing only on the documents that directly implicated my father. But Richard had been driving the Mustang. He was not married to my mother, Catherine, until 1983. In 1979, he would have been a 27-year-old law school dropout, a life stage before he became the successful Richard Webb. I went back to the box of the truth, which I now kept locked in a fireproof safe. I pulled out the 1979 letter my father had written to Walter. I was drunk. I didn't see her until it was too late. She came out of nowhere and there was this horrible sound. I just panicked. He mentioned no one else. The omission was glaring, deliberate. Richard had spent 40 years erasing every trace of his past before 1980. I decided my only path was to confront my mother, Catherine. She had fled with him, protected him, and had a right to her own independent reckoning. I did not want to protect her name on the Legacy Project website unless it was deserved. I knew my father, Richard, was beyond reach, sinking deeper into his self-pity in Florida. But my mother was a key part of the deception and now perhaps the key to the final truth. I called her cell phone. It took 4 rings before she picked up, her voice cautious and strained. Hello? It's Marcus. I have a question for you, Mom. A historical question about 1979. A heavy sigh on the other end. I knew you wouldn't leave it alone. What now, Marcus? Is it about your father? It's about 1979, the night of the accident, October 12th. I need to know if you were with him in the blue Mustang. Silence. Absolute, terrifying silence that stretched across the phone line, a silence far more damning than any defensive denial. Mom, were you there? Were you the woman in the car? When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a rasp, thick with unshed tears. Marcus, please, that was so long ago, it doesn't matter now. It matters to Michael and Elena, and it matters to me. Were you in the car? No, she whispered. I wasn't in the car. I didn't meet Richard until 1980, but I knew about her. I knew who the woman was. The truth, when it came, was like a delayed shockwave. Who was it, Mom? Her name was Denise Hartley. She was Richard's wife. His first wife. The revelation hit me with the force of an unexpected explosion. My father hadn't just changed his name. He hadn't just been a reckless bachelor. He had been a married man who abandoned his wife, or something worse, in the immediate aftermath of a fatal accident. His wife. I repeated, reeling. He was married before. What happened to her? She was in the car, my mother confirmed, her voice now flat, resigned to the bitter honesty she was finally allowing. They had been at a party. They were fighting when he hit the woman. She screamed at him to stop, to call the police, but he wouldn't. He drove away, terrified, and she threatened to leave him, to turn him in. So she was the witness the police noted. Yes. Richard pulled over 2 miles from the scene, and they had a massive fight. Denise told him she was calling the police, that she couldn't live with this. He threatened her. He told her if she said anything, he would ruin her life. He was ruthless, Marcus. He forced her to choose him or the truth. She chose the truth. She went to the police? No, not directly. Richard was too fast. He abandoned the car at a relative's farm, booked a flight out of the country the next day, and vanished. He left Denise with nothing, no money, no explanation. He called her from Europe a week later and told her he would pay her a substantial monthly amount to stay quiet, to disappear, and to never contact him again. He said if she broke the silence, he would destroy her life and her reputation. She took the money. She was trapped. Richard was her only support at the time. She was alone, broke, and terrified of his connections. She was essentially paid off to keep silent. He divorced her in absentia a year later and changed his name to Webb when he came back to the States in 1980. She was the one he truly erased, Marcus. He erased his whole first life. The complexity of my father's cowardice was breathtaking. He wasn't just a hit-and-run driver. He was a man who committed a crime, blackmailed his own wife into silence, and then erased his first identity to build a new one. The entire foundation of my family was a multi-layered lie built upon a single catastrophic act. "Where is Denise now?" I asked, my voice heavy. "I don't know. I only knew her name because Richard was panicked when we first met. He was still finalizing the divorce and covering his tracks. He told me he was divorcing a crazy woman who was obsessed with him. I never asked questions. I didn't want to know. And when we moved to your current house, Walter Hartley was the final piece of his past he needed to control. He didn't build the fence just to keep his father out. He built it to keep the secrets in." I thanked my mother and hung up the phone. I didn't feel simple anger at her. I felt a profound sense of pity for all the victims of Richard Hartley's moral void. Sarah Martinez, Walter Hartley, Denise, Michael, Elena, and now my own mother, trapped in a life of financial ruin and moral collapse because of the man she had chosen to believe. I called Elena Martinez and gave her the final, difficult piece of the puzzle. Denise Hartley, the erased first wife, the silent witness. A week later, Elena called me back. Her voice was quiet, professional, and resolved. "We found her, Marcus, Denise Hartley. She lives under her maiden name now in a small town in New Hampshire. We called her. We gave her Richard's full confession, your grandfather's letters, the whole truth. She cried for 2 hours. She has lived in constant, paralyzing fear of Richard for 45 years, convinced he would destroy her life if she ever spoke up. Is she willing to talk now? She is. She is coming to New Haven next week. She wants to meet me, Michael, and she wants to meet you. She says you are the only one who understands the burden of Richard's secrets." The final chapter of Walter's history lesson was about to be written. The meeting wasn't about the law, it was about the survivors. The son of the killer, the children of the victim, and the first wife, the silent witness. 3 lives, forever twisted by the actions of one selfish man, finally coming together to share the truth that had once sought to isolate and silence them all. The knowledge of my biological mother, Denise Hartley, was the capstone on the cathedral of truth my grandfather had built. The adoption papers were the final, irrefutable evidence that every single part of my life had been orchestrated by Richard, not out of love, but out of a desperate need to control every potential witness to his crime. I wasn't just his son, I was the ultimate insurance policy against his first wife, the witness who had tried to do the right thing. I had the truth, and I knew exactly what I had to do with it. My first call was to Elena Martinez. "Elena," I said, my voice heavy with controlled emotion. "I have the final piece, the biggest lie of all. The woman in the car, Denise Hartley, she is my biological mother. Richard stole me from her." I explained the adoption papers, the blackmail, and the horrific calculation that had driven Richard to take his own son away from the woman who had only wanted justice. Elena listened without interrupting, the only one who could truly comprehend the depth of Richard's moral void. "Marcus," she finally said, her voice filled with a profound sorrow. "He used the crime to destroy everyone. Sarah, Denise, Walter, you, even my father. He used the very fear of exposure as his weapon of mass destruction. The history is incomplete until she knows I know, I said. And until she knows she has a son who wants to meet her, I need to contact her. Can you help? Within 2 days, Alina and Michael arranged a quiet, private meeting in New Hampshire. The reunion with Denise was unlike any other meeting in this long, terrible saga. When I walked into the quiet, sun-filled living room of her small, coastal home, she was standing by the window. She was no longer the nervous witness from the lawyer's office. She was simply a woman waiting for a miracle she never dared to believe in. She turned and saw me. Not the image of her tormentor, but the face of her son, a man she had been blackmailed into forgetting. She didn't cry immediately. She simply walked toward me, reached out, and touched my face, her fingers tracing the jawline that reminded her of Richard. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice thick with 40 years of unshed tears. "My baby, I thought he won. I thought you would hate me for giving you up." "You didn't give me up, Mom," I said, using the word for the first time, the weight of it settling into my soul. "You were stolen. Richard used his crime to steal me. I know the truth. Walter kept the truth, and I've come home." The tears finally came then for both of us, a deluge of shared pain, lost time, and overwhelming relief. We stood there, mother and son, 2 more survivors of Richard Hartley's long and terrible lie, finally reunited in the quiet sanctity of honesty. We spent the entire day talking. She told me about the fear, the isolation, the crippling guilt of not having the courage to speak out and risk losing me entirely. I told her about Walter, the fence, and the 6-inch hole that had been my only connection to genuine, unconditional love. We realized that, even in the depths of Richard's deception, Walter had been standing guard over the ultimate hostage, ensuring that his legacy of love was passed on. My father, Richard, died 1 year later, alone and stripped of his wealth in Florida. My mother, Catherine, faded into silence. The entire structure of the lie collapsed, leaving only the honest, painful truth in its wake. I made 2 final, symbolic changes to the property. First, I had the 10-foot cedar fence taken down. It was a massive, ceremonial act of demolition. The wood was recycled, the posts pulled up, and the long, terrible wall of separation was gone. I replaced it with a simple 3-foot stone wall, a boundary, not a barrier. Second, I used a portion of Walter's estate to officially establish the Sarah Martinez Scholarship Fund at the community college where I taught. The fund was dedicated to adult students seeking to restart their education. The money my father used to build his lies was now being used to rebuild lives. I had a small, bronze plaque affixed to the fireplace mantel in Walter's living room, a private memorial that read, "Walter Hartley, 1918-2022, lived in silent consequence so the truth would survive. He chose love over silence and justice over kinship. I was Marcus Webb." I kept Walter's house, his books, and his moral legacy. I taught my students that history is not just about the big events of the world, but the small, agonizing moral choices we make every day. I taught them that the greatest courage is not in running from the past, but in facing it and accepting the consequence. I finally found peace, not in forgiveness, but in final, complete truth. I was the historian who inherited the full story, and in telling it, I finally set everyone, Walter, Sarah, Denise, Michael, Alina, and myself, free. The long, dark chapter of the lie was closed. The future was open, and it was built finally on honest ground.